Now, more of Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the only show directly addressing the problems and solutions for Illinois. Now, from AM 560, here's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Pat Hughes on this edition of Illinois Rising. Pat Hughes, co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project. And Pat, this week, Missouri had the opportunity to enact a right-to-work law to join, 26 other states now?
Correct.
And Governor Jay Nixon, who's Democrat, vetoed the right-to-work bill that had been passed by the Missouri State Legislature. They moved to override his veto, but they couldn't because of Republican defections.
Yeah, it's disappointing that they had enough Republicans to override it in the House, and they weren't able to do it. The irony of this is, first of all, there's the principle of right to work, right? I mean, you shouldn't be forced to join a union if you want to do a particular job. So there's just sort of a liberty principle that's at place there. But the other thing is, if you look at our neighboring right to work states, obviously it doesn't include Missouri and it does include Illinois. Job growth is up in those states.
Indiana, Wisconsin.
Correct. Michigan, job growth is up to those states. And this is really, as compared to the non-right to work states, and this is the really interesting thing, and union membership is up in those states because people are voluntarily participating. They don't feel like it's something that is a cudgel against them. And so, there's real strong arguments both for job growth and union growth that a state should be right to work. So it's disappointing that Missouri didn't follow that lead.
And it seems like maybe the momentum for the right to work movement stalled a bit after that shocking victory in Michigan not so long ago to have a seemingly a more conservative state, a less unionized state than like Missouri, have Republicans not be willing to essentially back the legislation they sent to the governor's desk is kind of an interesting development. To help us understand that development, we're now joined by Eric Boehm. He's a reporter with Watchdog.org and writes on state government pensions and labor issues. Eric, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So help us make sense of what happened in Missouri where there were just enough Republican defections to fail to override the governor's veto on this.
Yeah, that's right. We should actually go a few months. The right-to-work legislation passed back in the spring there. It was then vetoed by the Democratic Governor Jay Nixon in Missouri, and that set up a showdown this week when the legislature reconvened for their veto session when they can, try to override governor's vetoes. There was a fair bit of speculation on both sides about whether the Republican-controlled legislature would have enough votes. They actually do have enough Republican members in both the House and the Senate in Missouri. It's a veto-proof majority. So if they had voted just straight down party lines, they would have been able to override the veto. That didn't happen. The vote took place on Wednesday afternoon, and they came up just short of what they needed. So that means that Missouri does not become the 26th right-to-work state. It would have been a bit of a symbolic victory there for right-to-work advocates nationally, of course, because it would have gone over the 50% mark. But that's it didn't happen there. It now will, I think, linger into the next legislative session. Certainly, it'll be a big issue in the campaign too.
Is the issue popular among voters? I mean, where does the electorate come down on that issue in Missouri?
Yeah, polls generally show, and poll questions can always be sort of slanted one way or the other, but polls generally show that right to work is popular in Missouri and nationally. But I don't think it's something that is really high on most voters' radar. It's not near the top of major political discussions nationally. It's something that people who know about it, people who care about it, are very passionate about it. Business groups, people within, even some, people within the labor community are very strongly in favor of it. But it doesn't necessarily, peek into most voters' top 5 issues generally.
Eric, it's Pat Hughes. Thanks so much for joining us. What happened with the Republicans that voted to not override Nixon's veto? I mean, what is the sort of threshold pressure that's on them? Are they in pro-union districts? Explain the politics of that a little bit.
Yeah, that's generally the case. It's been kind of fascinating to look at Missouri. I've spent the last month or so covering this issue off and on, but I'm not originally from there. But it was fun to learn about sort of the political dynamics of the state. It's similar to Illinois or where I'm from in Pennsylvania, where you have a couple of big cities that are obviously dominated by Democrats. You have the suburbs of those cities that are moderate Republican districts, sometimes Democratic districts. And in Missouri, that's kind of the case. You've got 2 big cities on either side of the state, St. Louis and Kansas City. And just about every Democrat in the legislature hails from one of those two places, except for a couple that come from Columbia, which is the college town out in the middle of the state. And then around those two cities, what you have is an area that is formerly more industrial, formerly more unionized, but is now very much a Republican area, and that's why the Republicans have made huge gains in the Missouri legislature over the last decade or so. But there are still some lingering union strength there, some lingering union sympathy, I guess would probably be the right way to put it.
Well, and
these are not conservative Republicans by any means.
Well, one of the things that complicates this issue too for some Republicans in districts you're describing is, you can have a good relationship with the trade unions and maybe be have less strong ties to the public sector unions and make that work. But the right to work laws kind of brings the public sector unions into line with the trade unions, and now you're facing opposition from both. Is that what we saw a little bit happen in Missouri?
Yes, it's actually kind of interesting. The public sector unions, as far as we could tell from our coverage there, they didn't get too much involved in this fight. It was the carpenters union, the plumbers union, the private sector unions that were really leading the charge here. But that's exactly what I went into this expecting to see, because that's what we've seen in other states. I mean, in Michigan and in Wisconsin, where right to work passed recently, it was very much, all the unions joined together, and that's where they get their political strength from, right, is the ability to kind of link arms on issues that don't necessarily affect all of them, but, they all kind of join up and help each other out. But that really didn't happen too much in Missouri. I think part of the reason for that is public sector unions already essentially operate under a right-to-work policy in Missouri. There is no automatic dues deduction for public sector workers in Missouri. So I think that the public sector unions there aren't, at least in my experience the last month or so, don't seem to be as strong as they are in, say, Illinois, where they really have got a lot of muscle.
Yes, that certainly distinguishes them from Illinois. Eric Boehm, he is a reporter with Watchdog.org. Thanks so much for joining us, Eric. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for having me.